right, well, good evening and welcome to the Luce Center's first ever Evening with Friends featuring our good friend, Dr. Paul Kengor. My name is Kimberly Begg. I am the president of the Luce Center. We are an all-women organization that specializes in the conservative outreach, education, and mentorship of young women to help prepare conservative women and promote them for conservative leadership. We have year-round activities across the country. We just wrapped up our college women's luncheon with Molly Hemingway, and we had a firearms training at both Grand Canyon University and Clemson University. In the coming weeks, we will have Paula Scanlon speaking for us at UC Berkeley, So-Hyun Lee speaking for us at Kenyon College, and Dawn Hawkins, who will be here at the center speaking on sex trafficking and digital exploitation. That event will be March 21st, and I hope that you will all join us again for that event. I would like to take the opportunity to thank those of you who have recently become members of the Luce Center. This is a brand new initiative that we are very excited about. It is designed to strengthen our national network of conservatives and also to give our supporters greater access to our events, including our national student summits. This year, we are going to be in Washington, D.C. in July and Scottsdale in October. This initiative will also enable us to help more young women thrive in their personal and professional lives, which will lead to stronger families, stronger communities, and a stronger America. Now, please see my colleague, Catherine Hendershot, there she is, there's Catherine, if you have any questions about membership. Now, it is my great honor to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Paul Kengor, a distinguished historian and best-selling author whose deep research on totalitarian regimes has made him a nationally recognized authority on the dangers of Marxism in all its forms. Dr. Kengor serves as a professor at Grove City College and is the senior director at the Institute for Faith and Freedom, where his work focuses on the intersection of history, ideology, and faith. A widely respected scholar and prolific author, Dr. Kengor has written over a dozen books, including The Devil and Karl Marx and Dupes, How America's Adversaries Have Manipulated Progressives for a Century, and we have those books outside. Dr. Kengor is going to be signing after his remarks. His work has not only shaped historical discourse, but also inspired Hollywood. The acclaimed blockbuster film Reagan, starring Dennis Quaid, was based on his book The Crusader, Ronald Reagan and the Fall of Communism. In the past year alone, Dr. Kengor has reached millions discussing the topic of Marxism on some of the most influential platforms in the world, including Jordan Peterson's podcast and The Ben Shapiro Show. He is also currently collaborating with PragerU on the Hall of Evil video series, detailing the legacies of Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Hitler, and other tyrannical leaders. Tonight, Dr. Kengor will speak on the Marxist roots of International Women's Day, observed tomorrow, March 8th, and widely celebrated by major corporations, including McDonald's, Shell, and other Fortune 500 companies, as well, of course, as colleges and universities worldwide. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Kengor.
Thanks, Kimberly. Great to be here. Kimberly's an old friend, and I knew her from the YAF days, Young America's Foundation. And when I found out that she was running the Clare Boothe Luce Center, I said, oh, man, that's perfect. I mean, that is a great call. She's the perfect person for that position. And C-SPAN here as well. Thank you, C-SPAN. People often call C-SPAN and say, thank God for C-SPAN. That's why I say, thank God for C-SPAN. One of the only places that just brings the cameras in and lets them run. No commentary, right? If this was being aired on like CNN or MSNBC, they'd be coming, and right now he's talking about, so right? They wouldn't be able to just let the guy talk, right? So they showed the whole thing and let it rip. And I think I've been on C-SPAN a lot, and they've never shied from dealing with some of these very controversial topics. So that's it's impressive in today's cancel culture. So today, I'm going to jump right to it because I've got 29 slides, and Kimberly said talk for about 30 minutes. I don't know. I'll try. I'll see what I can do. She said leave a lot of time for questions. And I think we arranged this probably this time last year. And so I'm the editor of the American Spectator, and every year for American Spectator, I write a piece on International Women's Day, about the subject of International Women's Day, which is always, as you'll see, March 8th. And so the last one, I think I sent the article to Kimberly, or she saw it. She said, you need to come here next year and talk about International Women's Day. In fact, I'll have a piece tomorrow in American Spectator, my annual International Women's Day piece. And I often get emails from people who just can't believe what I'm reporting, right? And in fact, you'll see that today. All right. So I'll start off here by saying little Q&A. All right. What do International Women's Day and Vladimir Putin both have in common? All right. They were both promoted by the KGB. All right. They were so liberals, right? With those Ukraine flags that you're flying out there, you hate Vladimir Putin. I don't know that you hated Vladimir Lenin, but you hate Vladimir Putin, all right? KGB promoted him and promoted International Women's Day as well. So I'm going to go through all of that in this presentation. You're going to be shocked by a lot of this, I promise. So we'll start with who else but Karl Marx. And I'll just point out for the C-SPAN cameras, so there's a couple on the wall here. I have a PowerPoint presentation, and on the two walls, there's screens. So Karl Marx, 1818, 1883, and he was not a big fan of the family, all right? This guy was not a great advocate of the family. His book, the classic, of course, the Communist Manifesto, which was published in 1848, February 1848, which he wrote with his partner, Friedrich Engels. And I hear all the time, right, that people will say, oh, communism's a pretty good idea if you just read the manifesto, right? It talks about sharing, helping your fellow man. And I know right away when they said that they haven't actually read it. And there's no excuse for not reading it because it's like 50-some pages. In fact, at Grove City College, every spring semester, I teach a Marxism course, and we used the 1998 edition by the late Professor Martin Malia of Cal Berkeley, who was a really good Marxism scholar. And in that book, it's like 52, 55 pages. It's not that long. But if you actually read it, all right, you'll find phrases like the entire communist theory may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property. They begin the book by saying a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. And then they say, all of ancient Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter. Exorcise as in like exorcism. And then they note Pope and Tsar, Guizot, Metternich, French radicals, German police spies. That's how they set it up. But there's phrases in there like this one. Abolition of the family, exclamation mark. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. So they wrote that in 1848. Abolition of the family, right? Even the most radical flare up at this already in 1848 infamous proposal of the communists. So what does it really mean, right? Well, when you learn a lot about these guys and what they believed and what they did and what their personal lives were like, well, all right, here we go. I'll give you some examples of that. Marx's partner, as I said, was Friedrich Engels, 1820 to 1895. Engels was not just Marx's partner in writing and researching on communism, but he was Marx's chief subsidizer. I mean, Karl Marx refused to work, all right? Both his wife, Jenny, and his mother both expressed the wish that Karl would start earning some capital, right, rather than just writing about capital. The guy sat around all day on his rear end, even developed carbuncles and boils. They had to bring in doctors to find out, why Marx was afflicted by these things. The guy refused to work. They got all of their money from inheritance. First, Marx went to his parents, and Karl Heinrich Marx, his father. Father died. Marx did not attend the funeral. Later goes, and by the way, the father and the mother at one point both cut him off and said, Karl, it breaks our heart to see what's happening with your family, but we can't give you any more money. I mean, we just can't. We just can't give you any more money. After the death of his funeral, he went to visit his mother, and he wrote back to his wife. He said, she wouldn't give me any more money, but at least I got her to tear up the IOUs, right? A success. His wife went begging to her family. When her family, when there would be the knock on the door from Marx's wife, I mean, they would just go and pull the shades down, right? Because they knew what she was asking for. So the chief person who was the subsidizer was Friedrich Engels. And Engels became Marx's sugar daddy. And all the money that Marx got came from Engels. If it wasn't for Engels, you really probably wouldn't have the Marx of history, not only because of the partnership, but because he subsidized them. Their views on the family, they wrote, it is impossible to speak of the family. All right, so they were already in this habit of the wider left of redefining the family. They said in their 1844 book, The Holy Family, the earthly family is discovered as the secret of the holy family. The former must itself be theoretically and practically destroyed. So think about that, 1844. Marx wrote a letter to Engels where he wrote, blessed is he who has no family. Marx had a bunch of kids. Engels didn't have any. Engels lived with a number of different women. And in fact, the final woman that he lived with who unexpectedly died, he was just devastated by it because he was genuinely in love with her. She wanted to get married. He refused to marry her. And but by the way, Marx wrote a letter to Engels where he acknowledged Engels' loss and then got right on to the more important question at hand of asking for more money. And Engels, even one of the pro-Marx biographers said, Engels wrote back this scathing letter, just fuming. Even my capitalist friends showed more sympathy. Why you? Just angry at Marx. And that almost split the relationship because of Marx's insensitivity. More on that in a minute. But they also wrote in the Communist Manifesto, the communist revolution is the most radical rupture with traditional relations and traditional ideas. Stop and think about that. For the people who think, oh, it's a pretty good book. They talk about sharing the wealth. Marx and Engels would tell you, no, our ideas represent the most radical rupture in traditional relations and traditional ideas. What are the final words of the Communist Manifesto? Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. In the paragraph before that, Marx and Engels call for, quote, the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. So it's very radical. They write this in the little manifesto. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. But you will say we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. So the idea was ban home education, and when the Bolsheviks would come, no homeschooling, no religious schooling, and most schooling was done by private schools and by the Russian Orthodox Church, right? They want to ban religion, they want to attack religion, they want to abolish the family, they want to abolish religion. So they want to take home education away. They want to put all the kids into educational collectives, government collectives, where religion isn't taught, morality is being redefined. And this phrase here, I mean, think about that again. You would charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents. To this we plead guilty. But you say we destroy the most hallowed of relations, right? The hallowed correlation between parent and child. And the fact is, the relationship between parent and child is hallowed. Right, Father? Correct? I mean, that is sacred. That is a sacred relationship. They wanted to redefine that. They denounced in the manifesto what they called the disgusting bourgeois claptrap about the family and education. And their final point in their 10-point plan, they called for free education for all children in public schools. That's the final point in their 10-point plan. Number 1 is abolition of property on land. 2 and 3, graduated progressive income tax. Abolition of all right of inheritance. Talk about hypocrisy on that one, right? And then 10, free education for all children in public schools. All right, now, as for Marx, waiting for this one to pop up. Where is it? There it is, okay. Okay, try that again. Okay, Marx had a bunch of kids, married, all right. At one point, Marx's wife's family says, we need to cut you off too, we can't give you any more money. This is just, this is wrong. Karl, this is wrong. This is wrong. What we will do is we will lend you the family nursemaid. Her name was Helen DeMuth, known as Lenchen, and she grew up with Marx's wife. And they said, we'll at least give you her as like a nursemaid to help around the house. All right, so this is Marx's wife's friend from youth. Marx didn't pay her a penny. It wasn't, but one of the things you learn about Marxism is Marxism and communism. Marxism and communism are for the ruled, not the rulers. All right, different rules for them. Different rules for Lenin, Stalin, Castro, Pol Pot, Mao, right? Different rules for all that. Marx at one point got Lenchen, Helen DeMuth, pregnant. Marx denied that the child was his. When the child was born, a boy, Friedrich Engels stepped in and said, I'll save you again. And Engels accepted paternity. They named the son Freddie. Marx refused to ever acknowledge that Freddie was his child, refused, of course, to pay even a penny of child support, and this broke Marx's wife's heart. In fact, even the pro-Karl Marx biographers said, her affection for Karl never recovered after this. All right, moving on to other socialists, other Marxists. Here we are in the United States. Now, this will pop up. There's a little bit of a delay, I think, in the screen. These are the so-called Yankee utopians. Come on, where's the screen? Try this again. There they are. Socialists in the United States in the early 1800s. The guy on the left is John Humphrey Noyes, lived 1811, 1886. He set up, he's one of the only communists I know who's religious, called himself a Bible communist. He was a Puritan. They kicked him out of New England. So he went into the hills of New York and established the Oneida Colony, right? Some of you know about this. The Oneida Colony, it's one of the only colonies, like ideological colonies, that actually survived for a while because they had a product. They made silverware. But yeah, they redefined marriage, no longer between one man and one woman. I mean, they didn't do same-sex, the idea of same-sex marriage, I mean, no one ever conceived of that. I mean, that, what Americans have done with that and the modern world has done with that, Austin, correct? It's since like 2010, 2015. That's just completely new. All right, that would have floored any of these guys. But they did group marriages. The younger girls hated this, right? Because, they hated being put into like a forced marriage with a guy like John Humphrey Noyes. The other person who was kind of an infamous Yankee utopian, my colleague at American Spectator, Dan Flynn, calls them Yankee utopians. Robert Owen. Robert Owen established the New Harmony colony in Indiana. He ought to be known about. He gave his infamous Declaration of Mental Independence on July 4th, 1826. Now, what year is that? 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Who was still alive at that point? Which two founding fathers? Adams and Jefferson. And they're both hanging on. It's America's Jubilee. Everyone's wondering, wow, are they going to make it? Are they going to make it? Jefferson was 83 years old. Adams was 90. They both made it to that day. The country's celebrating. Wow, look at this wonderful republic we've established. Well, in the background, there's always these guys. All right? So Robert Owen stands up there at his ideological colony in New Harmony, Indiana, and he says, I now declare to you and to the world that man up to this hour, this is a socialist, has been in all parts of the earth a slave to the trinity of the most monstrous evils that could be combined to inflict mental and physical evil upon the whole race. You guys, what would that be? What are these most monstrous evils ever inflicted? I'm all ears. What is it, dude, right? I refer to private property, absurd and irrational systems of religion, and marriage. Property, religion, and marriage. The revolution then to be now effected. He's saying this July 4th, 1826. This is 22 years before the Communist Manifesto was published. Is the destruction of this hydra of evils, that man may no longer be a superstitious idiot. All right, moving ahead here. I think this slide will really freak you guys out, all right? Here we've got Engels writing this in 1884. This is a year after Marx died, all right? And Engels writes this in his book, Origins of the Family. And he even said, you can consider Karl Marx the co-author of this book because he helped me write it, and he died in 1883, but for all effects and purposes, Marx was a co-author. Next to him, Alexandra Kalante. This is bringing us closer to International Women's Day. She was the leading feminist of the Bolshevik Revolution, 1920. And Melissa Harris Perry, Duke, Wake Forest, MSNBC, Today. All right, here's what Engels and Marx wanted to do. With the transfer of the means of production into common ownership, that would be socialism, right? That would be communism. The single family ceases to be the economic unit of society. We would consider that a bad thing, right? They think that's good. Private housekeeping is transformed into a social industry. The care and education of the children becomes a public affair. Society looks after all children alike. They wanted women pushed out of the house into factories and farms, and the taking care of children would be done by full-time state-run nurseries, all right? And this is what they did in many communist countries. Kalante described it this way. The old type of family has had its day. The worker mother must learn not to differentiate between yours and mine. She must remember that there are only our children, the children of Russia's communist workers. Communist society will take it upon itself all the duties involved in the education of the child. Now look at what Melissa Harris Perry says today. It's like 5 or 6 years ago. We have never invested as much in public education as we should because we've always had this kind of private notion of children. She thinks that's bad, I guess. We haven't had a very collective notion of our children. We have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Very similar to what Kalante said, very similar to what Engels said. And I remember reading in the reader comments in one of the websites that reported that, and people were saying, this sounds like communism. Well, yeah, it does. And I'm sure people on the left would say, oh, that's just like Joe McCarthy talking there. No, read. Read The Origins of the Family by Engels in 1884. Read Kalante and The Communism of the Family in 1920. Read. Educate yourself. The Bolsheviks took over in Russia what year? 1917. They right away legalized divorce and abortion. I'll get to abortion in a second. Engels was an especially strong proponent of this, as you could probably imagine. He didn't like the idea of marriage. They immediately lifted the Russian Orthodox Church's prohibition against divorce. Super simple. By the way, it was hard to have religious freedom, property, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, right? The right to own private property. But hey, baby, you want a divorce? Just take this postcard, right? You want an abortion? 24/7 centers, right? Easy, no problem. On divorce, the effect was catastrophic. The Atlantic in 1920, Atlantic goes way back, right? It's an old publication. Published a piece titled "The Russian Effort to Abolish Marriage," because it looked like that's what they were doing. They had world record divorce rates. One study reported in the late 1960s, this is a Harvard University Press book, that it was not unusual to meet Soviet men and women who had been married and divorced upwards of 15 times. That common. I remember a John Le Carre book where he said, the main character, Tatiana, says, but in Moscow, everybody's divorced. The highest divorce rates, as well as abortion rates, were in communist countries: Russia, Cuba, Romania, Vietnam. Abortion. Lenin promised in 1913 in Pravda the unconditional annulment of all laws against abortion. Wanted to make sure that you had that freedom, not the freedom of property or religion or press or assembly, but the freedom to abortion. 1920, abortion was made fully and legally available and provided free of charge. By 1934, Moscow women were having 3 abortions for every live birth. It got so bad that Stalin banned it in 1936. And Trotsky, who's in exile at that point, said, well, you can't do that. You can't be a good communist and ban abortion. But Stalin said, we're not going to have a country left if these kind of rates keep up. By the 1970s, the Soviet Union was averaging 7 to 8 million abortions per year. In America, at the height of Roe v. Wade, it was 1 to 2. About the same population, too, comparably, 7 to 8 million a year. WHO did a study in the year 2000 that said at this rate of growth with this going on, by the year 2050, Russia's population will plunge from 140 to 104 million. It's that bad. It was one of the reasons why Putin provided the first restrictions on abortion since Stalin, because Khrushchev brings it back in the 1950s. And the Russians under Putin have been having national fertility days to try to get people just to have babies. They've make love, not war, Vlad, right? I mean, go out, have a baby. I don't care how you do it. You don't have to get married. Just go, have a baby. They've cracked down on adoption of Russian children by foreigners because they want to keep their people. Here are 2 famous American communists. This was true in the Communist Party USA. Bella Dodd, I've written a book on Bella Dodd. And she was probably the highest ranking woman in the party. I think she and Elizabeth Bentley were probably the 2 most important female members of Communist Party USA. She told us, she said, the party did all it could to push women into industry, just like in the Soviet Union. This is Communist Party USA. The bourgeois family as a social unit was to be made obsolete. I often talked of adopting children. She came from this big Italian family that had immigrated to New York in the early 1900s, really ached to have children. The comrades dissuaded me. Communism is an all-embracing philosophy which embraces everything you do, the kind of marriage you have, your relations with children. Whittaker Chambers, in Witness, said that they, the communists, regarded marriage as a bourgeois convention and loathed it with the same intensity with which many middle-class persons loathe sin. He talks, the famous moment, the famous passage in Witness where he's marveling in his little daughter's ear while she's having breakfast in a high chair, and it kind of etches in his mind the idea of a creator. But when his wife first got pregnant, they were going to have an abortion because that's what you did if you were a communist, right? This is long before Roe v. Wade. You know who was really horrified by this? Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, which was originally called the ABCL, the American Birth Control League. So I use it at Grove City College, an article that she wrote in the Nation in 1932, where she said, when we talk of birth control, people think that it includes abortion. It does not. We are completely against abortion. We are completely against that. We are for birth control. We are not for abortion. So obviously, Planned Parenthood changes on this, right, by the 1970s. She made pilgrimage to the Soviet Union, all right, with her boyfriend, H.G. Wells, left the kids back at home with her husband, And she comes back and she writes this in Birth Control Review, her publication, June 1935. She said, on the Soviet state as a nanny. By the way, we talk about the nanny state in the United States. This was truly a nanny state, right? The nannies were run by the state. The mother and the child are under the protection and care of the government to an extent perhaps never before equaled in history. She liked that. As for birth control in Russia, theoretically, there are no obstacles. It is accepted on the grounds of health and human right. We could well take example from Stalin's Russia, where there are no legal restrictions, no religious condemnation, and where birth control instruction is part of the regular welfare service of the government. But she was horrified at the number of abortions. She was aghast. This is right before Stalin bans it, because Stalin's aghast. The number for Moscow alone is roughly estimated at 100,000 per year. All the officials with whom, but there's this saving grace. All the officials with whom I discussed the matter stated that as soon as the economic and social plans of Soviet Russia are realized, well, neither abortions nor contraception will be necessary. Why? A functioning communistic society will ensure the happiness of every child. It will assume the full responsibility for its welfare and education. That's how she saw it. All right. A few others here. I'll go a little quicker through these next ones because I want to get to International Women's Day. These are the bad dudes. They just look like bad dudes, don't they? These are the Freudian Marxists, the Marxists who combine, who fuse sex with class. The guy in the top there is George Lukács, who was the cultural commissar to Béla Kun, who was the Hungarian leader of when the communists tried to take over Hungary after World War I, 1919, 1920. And Lukács said, you could see him there smoking a cigarette, "Woman is the enemy. Healthy love dies in marriage, which is a business transaction. The bourgeois family gives off swamp vapors. Politics is only the means, culture is the goal." By the way, his wife left him, as you could probably imagine. This other guy, Wilhelm Reich, was really a weirdo, really a weirdo. Do you guys know that the term the sexual revolution was coined by Wilhelm Reich in his book in 1929 by that name? Not in 1968, right? 1929 under Wilhelm Reich. He spoke of the wretchedness of marriage, said marriages fall to pieces as a result of the ever-deepening discrepancy between sexual needs and economic conditions. See how they always apply economics and class to everything. The sexual needs can be gratified with one and the same partner for a limited time only. You imagine telling that to your spouse, right? Well, I'm sorry, honey, but I can only be gratified by you for a limited amount of time, and right? And this is like economic conditions or business transaction, to quote George Lukács, right? Our bourgeois family gives off swamp vapors. The other guy who was part of this crew, Herbert Marcuse, who was the most influential member of the Frankfurt School. He was a Freudian Marxist. He spoke, are there kids in here? I guess, okay, all right, good. He proposed sexual liberation through the cultivation of what he called polymorphous perverse sexuality, which included, I won't read it all there, right, but all forms of different types of, at that time, would not have been conventional intercourse, right? Sexual liberation was achieved by exploring new permutations of sexual desires and activities and gender roles, what Freud called perverse sexual desires, that is, all non-reproductive forms of sexual behavior. So they're separating it. They're separating it from the act. He becomes the guru to the 1960s New Left. Weather Underground, that group. New Left feminists, Betty Friedan, right? Her 1963 book, The Feminine Mystique, which asserted that suburban homesteads of American housewives were akin to comfortable concentration camps. It's a hell of an offensive thing to say toward Jewish people, by the way, right? Compared to what went on in Auschwitz and Nazi Germany, compare that to what women and suburban housewives have. Kate Millett, her 1969 book, which was her dissertation at Columbia, Sexual Politics. She said that patriarchy granted the father nearly total ownership over wife or wives and children. A sexual revolution would require an end of traditional sexual inhibitions and taboos, homosexuality, illegitimacy, adolescent, pre- and extramarital sexual activity. When Kate died a few years ago in Paris, she died in a hotel room next to her wife. So she had married and she had become a major LGBTQ advocate. Here's Kate's sister, Mallory. Actually, that's Kate. That's not Mallory. The picture is Kate. But Mallory is alive and well and very, very outspoken. You can read a lot of Mallory's writings about Kate. And she talked about going to a group in 1969 of Ivy League girls. They're all sitting around and they're doing a kind of litany, a kind of chant in Kate's apartment. And they said, "Why are we here today? To make revolution." What kind of revolution? The cultural revolution. How do we make cultural revolution? By destroying the family. How do we destroy the family? By destroying the patriarchy. That's all right out of sexual politics. How do we destroy the patriarch? By taking away his power. How do we destroy monogamy? By promoting promiscuity, eroticism, prostitution. Mallory, in writing about this, says that she's talked to women today who have come up to her in tears and said, that book, which I was required to read in college in the early 70s, right? Your sister's book destroyed my sister's life. She was happily married with 4 kids. After she read those books, she walked out on her bewildered husband and never looked back. Family fell into despair and ruin. Children were stunted, deeply harmed. There was no putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. These ideas are destructive. And they were intended to be destructive because they wanted to destroy the traditional family. Remember what Marx and Engels said, right? Communism represents the most radical rupture in traditional ideas and traditional relations. Here is America's most famous female communist. Who is she? Angela Davis, a student of Herbert Marcuse. She was Marcuse's star student. All right. She ended up running for vice president of the United States on the Communist Party USA ticket, late 1970s, early 1980s. There she is in that picture as one of the honorary co-chairs of the Women's March in D.C. in January 2017, the day before Donald Trump's first inauguration. While she's there, she's not quoting Marx and Engels. She's talking about the environment, transgenderism, LGBTQ. That's where they are today. They're no longer talking about class and economics. They're on to the sexual gender stuff. She is Ilhan Omar of Congress, says that Angela Davis is her inspiration, hero, and role model. And Patrisse Cullors, the founder of BLM, her book, her memoir, the foreword is written by Angela Davis. So these ideas are around. New York Times. You can now find articles in the New York Times. They did a bunch of them in 2017, 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. And this is now so prevalent that when I did my book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Communism, I had to have a section just debunking this. There are a lot of people on the left in textbooks and at the New York Times and elsewhere who today are pushing this narrative that communism was great for women. And if you read it, it's like, why? How? Right? And it's always, well, because they pushed them into the factory and farms. They gave them full-time employment. The government was willing to take care of their kids for it and pay it. And also abortion, abortion, abortion. Abortion rights, abortion rights, abortion rights. To them, there's nothing more important than that. I quote here a popular high school textbook called The World's History by Prentice Hall. Legally speaking, Russian women under Bolshevism were better off than women anywhere in the world. You can't possibly justify that statement unless your alpha and omega is like abortion rights, as like the pinnacle. August 12, 2017, the New York Times published an article. Look it up. C-SPAN, people, right? You guys listening? Why women had better sex under socialism. Well, there you go. I wrote an article on that at the time for American Spectator, and a guy wrote to me, he said, you know, I used to work at the Berlin Wall, the Brandenburg Gate, and I could tell you that in the winters, especially after about 6 o'clock, all the heat and electricity went off in East Germany and East Berlin. There's really nothing else to do but have sex at that point. The New York Times ran a piece September 25th, 2017 called How Did Women Fare Under China's Communist Revolution? And they conclude, the communists did many terrible things, but they made women's lives much better. And never mind the one-child policy. State Department put out a report about 20 years ago that said China has, what percentage of the world's population, folks? A quarter? A fifth? Maybe something like that? But over half of the world's female suicides. All right, International Women's Day. Here they are. These are the two kind of matriarchs of International Women's Day. Alexandra Kalante, who I quoted earlier, her 1920 statement. So she lived 1872 to 1952, Russian. And the other one, Clara Zetkin, socialist, German socialist, 1857 to 1933. So here's Kalante in her 1920 statement defining International Women's Day, which we now celebrate, all right? Many Americans now celebrate. She said this, it is a great holiday for the proletariat. The 8th of March is a historic and memorable day for the Russian workers. She gives a little history. In 1910, Clara Zetkin brought forward the question of organizing an International Working Women's Day. The conference decided that every year in every country, they should celebrate the same day, a Women's Day, under the slogan, the vote for women will unite our strength in the struggle for socialism. Working Women's Day was first organized in the campaign for the struggle for socialism. They all say this. This aim has been achieved by the working class women in Russia and the Soviet Republic. Kalante added this, the goal, the victory of communism and complete and fundamental equality of women. That was the goal of International Women's Day. She said this at the Soviet Third International, working women of all countries, organize a united proletariat front in the struggle against those who are plundering the world. We welcome Soviet power. We will fight with the workers for the triumph of world communism. This is in her 1920 statement for International Women's Day. Here is Clara Zetkin's assessment. She proposed this in 1910. The socialist women of all countries will hold each year a Women's Day, whose foremost purpose it must be to aid the attainment of women's suffrage. This demand must be handled in conjunction with the entire women's question according to socialist precepts. Here is the Communist Party USA, Oregon, People's World. People's World, what was the publication of Communist Party USA for a long time? Some of you know, the Daily Worker. And People's World now runs it. They defined it this way. In 1917 in Russia, International Women's Day acquired great significance. It became the flashpoint for the Russian Revolution. In 1922, in honor of the women's role on International Women's Day in 1917, Vladimir Lenin declared that March 8th should be designated officially as Women's Day. It was a national holiday in the Soviet Union and most of the former socialist countries. So the day that we're celebrating now, Google is, and some of these other places, March 8th, Lenin gave you the day. Vladimir Lenin, not John Lennon. This is more that's posted on the website of International Women's Day in the year 2017. I'll skip ahead. But look where they are now. This is the About section of the International Women's Day website today, right now. They've scrubbed it. They've cleaned it up. They used to include Clara Zetkin. They used to include all this stuff about the Third International. Now they've gotten smart and they've realized you better take that stuff down. It's like BLM, removing the stuff about abolition of the nuclear family. It's like, Patrice, I know you say you're a trained Marxist, but that's real. We got to get that off there. That has nothing to do with George Floyd. All right? Get that off there. Here's what they say today. Imagine a gender equal world, a world that's diverse, equitable, and inclusive, where differences are valued and celebrated. International Women's Day has been around for over 100 years. Celebrate women's achievement. Raise awareness about discrimination. Take action to forge gender parity. This statement, all IWD activity is valid. By the way, I doubt they really believe that. They wouldn't like what I'm doing right now. That's what makes IWD so inclusive. IWD has a long and powerful history of collective action. That word collective is like all through the website. It's kind of one of the sort of giveaways in the language. All right, and now International Women's Day is our big day as well. Tomorrow morning when you get up, pull out your phone, go to your computer, type in www.google.com, go to the search engine, and you'll say, oh, what's that? They'll be celebrating International Women's Day. They now do it every year. Who's ever in charge at Google is now celebrating that. The calendars that I now buy, I keep a hard copy calendar. I don't like keeping everything on my phone, right? And if you go there and if you looked at the holidays, Christmas, right, Easter, not Columbus Day, but Indigenous Peoples Day, MLK Day, look at March 8th. It'll probably say International Women's Day. It's now acknowledged in those calendars. I heard a lady on a radio station in Pittsburgh, my hometown, last year said, Happy International Women's Day. What are you doing today? Tag your friend on social media. How are you celebrating International Women's Day? I'm thinking, oh man, it's a socialist holiday. Lenin named the day. No. They got IWD, the International Women's Day organization. They've managed to get as corporate sponsors McDonald's, Caterpillar, BP, MetLife, Western Union, PepsiCo, and also the National Organization for Women, People's World, Socialist Workers' Party, the Militant Communist Party USA. Here's some other IWD sponsors: Planned Parenthood, ACLU, Human Rights Campaign, all the unions. Well, all the teachers' unions, NEA, AFT, SEIU, AFSCME, Occupy Wall Street, NAACP, Human Rights Watch, People for the American Way, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which you probably consider what I'm doing right now to be some form of hate speech. And of course, Free the Nipple, Got a Girl Crush, and the Georgetown University College Democrats. But they are, I've noticed when I checked the IWD website yesterday, I didn't see any sponsors listed this year. And so I'm kind of hoping, I don't know, I've been writing about this every year going back to about 2017. Maybe Caterpillar and some of the other folks are starting to, maybe word has gotten back to them. You know how sensitive the corporations are to this, right? I mean, it was only a matter of time before Bud Light was probably one of the sponsors for this. But they've now kind of learned, and maybe they're backed off. And maybe IWD has just decided we shouldn't list the sponsors at this point. Okay, wrapping up. I have just 2 slides left. Here's our gal, Clare Boothe Luce. Clare Boothe Luce. She fought all of this. This was an amazing American. One survey listed her and Eleanor Roosevelt as the most admired women in America by the mid-century. She was a playwright. She was an actress, foreign correspondent, a great writer for Vanity Fair, Condé Nast, the original Condé Nast, the Condé Nast. She left that at one point and started writing plays. She wrote The Women in 1936, which was a major Broadway smash, that went to multiple countries all over the world. It was a big film as well, with Norma Shearer, Joan Crawford, others. After that, she goes into politics, twice elected congresswoman from Connecticut, becomes U.S. ambassador to Italy under named by Dwight Eisenhower. She had been married before to a man named Brokaw. They had a daughter together, Anne, and then she remarried to Henry Luce. So that's where she got the name Clare Boothe Luce. Luce was the founder of, imagine this, Time Magazine, Life Magazine, Fortune, Sports Illustrated. I mean, the guy was an enormously successful publisher. She was a conservative Republican, as I say, stalwart, very smart, keen anti-communist. She was, in her final years of life, she died in 1987. She served the Reagan administration. She was brought in by Bill Clark in particular, who's in my next slide. I'll get to Bill in a minute. Was a very important liaison between the Reagan administration and the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops, especially on the nuclear freeze issue. She was on the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. Reagan awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1983. So she was an extraordinary individual and a brilliant anti-communist. And I mean, these people fled from her. In fact, you could find cartoons in communist press publications where they're making fun of her and drawing her up to, look like a monster. I'll finish up with this. She was, here she is with a couple people, very, very important to her. Fulton Sheen. So Fulton Sheen converted her to Catholicism, and she was at the end of her rope. Her daughter, Anne, was killed in a car crash on Stanford University campus, I think 1944, 1945, around that time. And Claire had been with her the night before. They had gone to the chapel together. This was her only child. It was really just the love of her life. She felt really guilty that she had not given her enough time. This absolutely devastated her. Bill Clark, the man on the right, who became Ronald Reagan's national security advisor, was a student at Stanford. A few years later, when they built a memorial chapel to Anne after Anne had died, and that's where Bill met Claire and also Henry Luce and became very close to them. But she was suicidal at one point. Her life was that bad, and then she was put in touch with Fulton Sheen, and Fulton Sheen really brought her out of the pit. If I may quote, this is a new book on Archbishop Fulton Sheen, Convert Maker, published by my good friends at Ignatius Press. In fact, Ignatius Press published my biography of Bill Clark. So she said this: when they met, so Sheen invited Claire to dinner at his apartment, set the ground rules. There would be no discussion of religion over dinner, and then he would talk for 5 minutes, and then she could take all the time she needed to talk after that and ask him all the questions. Immediately, Sheen talked of the goodness of God, upon which Claire exploded. If God is good, then why did he take my daughter? This is classic Fulton Sheen. Talk about courage. Perhaps it was in order that you might become a believer, in order that you might discover God's truth. Maybe your daughter is buying your faith with her life. Anne's death was the purchase price of your soul. Whew. Some people might have stormed out of the room, but he had her, right? She eventually converts, very high-profile conversion story. A friend of hers later wrote about her conversion. Claire always had the capability of being great. There was her wonderful brain, her beauty, and her real desire to serve her country and all the peoples of the world. But there was always something lacking. Her conversion to Catholicism had given her the humility, the gentleness, and the warmth to love individual people. These were the things she needed to make her the really great woman that she is. The actress Loretta Young, I remember Loretta Young, later said this: she remained strong after her conversion, but in a positive way. I couldn't believe she was the same woman after her conversion. When Claire was asked if she would have become a Catholic if not for Bishop Fulton Sheen, she answered, "Of course. God intended me to be a Catholic, or he would have not have sent me to Father Sheen." For this brilliant teacher, this good and gifted professor of Catholic philosophy, I thank God. And then Sheen said this about her conversion: "Never in my life have I been privileged to instruct anyone who was as brilliant and who was so scintillating in conversation as Mrs. Luce." So that's Cheryl Hughes' new book on Fulton Sheen. R.M. Material Jr. on the bottom, he's the founder of American Spectator. He knew Claire very well, and he knew Bill Clark very well. Bob writes this about in his memoirs. Bill Clark became Claire's attorney, and Claire one night, just she and Bob were out together, and Bob at that point would have been probably about 40. She would have been about 80, and she was on the board at American Spectator, and she told him she confided, but told him about an assault, a sexual assault that had happened to her in early years. And she eventually went home that night. Terrell went home that night. Terrell gets a call at 3 o'clock in the morning from Bill Clark in Paso Robles, California, saying, "Mr. Terrell?" And Terrell knew him, so they were kind of friends. He said, yeah, what is it? This is Judge Bill Clark. "Oh, hi, Bill, what is it?" "Whatever you heard tonight, you're not allowed to repeat. You have that correct?" He said, okay. I was afraid he was going to put it in his magazine. But Clark became a protector of Clare Boothe Luce. And the last thing I wanted to mention, because I knew C-SPAN was going to be here, I want to take full advantage of this. Clark, as I said, I was Clark's biographer, and we were sitting in his ranch living room one day talking about all the different things we would talk about, because my family would be there with him at his ranch, talking about everything you can imagine. And we started talking about Clare Boothe Luce. And he said, over there on the piano, and he had sitting on the piano a manuscript. And he said, "That's written by Claire." I said, "What is it?" He said, "She wrote a screenplay for a movie called Claudia about the wife of Pontius Pilate." I thought, wow, really? And I think based not only on what's in Scripture, but like with Mel Gibson and The Passion, probably on the writings of Anne Catherine Emmerich as well. Anne Catherine Emmerich was, Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, German stigmatist, 1774, 1824, had these incredible visions of the past. And if you watch The Passion, those great scenes with Claudia, right, who's warning in a dream to Pontius Pilate what she's going through. So Anne took all of that, and this was a time in the 1950s when they were making big, epic Hollywood features. Charlton Heston, what's the one Charlton Heston's in? Come on, help me out. Ben-Hur, right? Ben-Hur. Moses, right? Quo Vadis. Yeah, all of those were done at that time. Claire wrote one on Claudia. It was her life's work. She was never more proud of anything than that. Howard Hughes wanted to have an affair with her. That's what Bill Clark told me. And she said, "No, I'm faithfully committed to my husband, Henry Luce." So according to this, Howard Hughes bought the rights to it and shelved it. And it never saw the light of day, and it's never been turned into a movie. So if anyone out there is interested in this, all right, we got some work to do, right? So Clare Boothe Luce, master work, Claudia, never published. All right, I think I better stop there. I went on too long, but Clare Boothe Luce, the anti-International Women's Day, all right? She fought all of this stuff. God bless Clare Boothe Luce. Thank you.
We now have about 10 minutes for questions, so please just raise your hand, and I or my colleague will bring you a microphone. We're going to start right here.
Austin, thanks for coming.
Nice to see you. Thanks so much for that. You know that we're in the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Women's Conference right now.
Yeah, right.
And the Commission on the Status of Women is meeting next week.
Mm.
They're negotiating a document at the UN right now. Well, first, the Beijing Women's document included paragraphs on mothers and motherhood. It has a really good definition of gender, men and women in the context of society. The document that they're negotiating now, which is going to be presented next week, has taken out all references to mother and motherhood. So,
Wow.
and that's happening right now.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I'm not.
And you know who's leading the charge on that? I hate to, for all you Hungary fans, but Hungary is leading the charge on this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is a battle. This is a revolution that's gone on for 200 years. It really has. I mean, you go back to the 2026, next year, 200th anniversary of Robert Owen's Declaration of Mental Independence, right? Calling marriage part of a hydra of evils, one of the most monstrous evils ever created. So when people think today, I mean, things like same-sex marriage, right? Obergefell decision, 2015, I mean, that's obviously completely new. But the idea of redefining the family and redefining marriage, those folks have been at that for hundreds of years. The first time that I saw the LGBTQIA plus was in People's World, the communist publication. I didn't even know what the IA plus meant. I had to look it up. And so I is intersex, A is asexual, and then plus just refers to everything else, right? But that was first time I saw that was in a communist publication. And Castro's Cuba is even on board for this stuff. And Castro at one point used to throw homosexuals in jail and in mental institutions, right? Yeah. Other questions?
One thing that jumped out at me that you said, and I want to make sure I have it right, is I think you said that abortion for communists is the alpha and the omega. That's right?
Yeah, abortion rights. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and of course, Jesus in Revelation said he was the alpha and the omega. So how much of communism and the movement even today is a rejection of or even a hatred of God?
Yeah, and they really did hate God, too. I mean, Marx said, in a favorite quote of Marx by Fulton Sheen, communism begins where atheism begins. And the opiate of the masses essay, where he refers to religion as the opiate of the masses, if you read that full context, he said, religion is the heart of a heartless world, soul of soulless conditions. It is the opiate of the masses. Lenin said, there's nothing more abominable than religion. All worship of a divinity is a necrophilia. So they were hell-bent on not just like separation of church and state or neutrality toward religion, but destroying religion. They actually wanted to squash it and kill it. Today, what's really interesting with communism today is look at People's World and some of these other publications. They often don't talk very much about economics and class anymore because they've given up on that, right? The Industrial Revolution is long over. The coal miner in West Virginia is voting for Trump, right? I mean, West Virginia is like now the most pro-Trump state, right? Where they vote for Trump, like 80 to 20% or something like that. My family, they grew up, my dad's side Polish, my mom's side Italian, coal miners, steel workers, Pittsburgh. They're no longer going into the steel mills. They're going into the university classrooms, and they're applying Marxism to culture, gender, and even race. And the way that they do that, so it's very simple. So the Marxist kind of superstructure was, as they say in the Communist Manifesto, the whole world is increasingly being divided into antagonistic camps. And for Marx and Engels, so this was oppressor versus oppressed. And they said the two camps are very simple, proletariat and bourgeoisie. One is the oppressor, the other is the oppressed. And all of the history at that point was marching toward this apocalyptic battle between these two camps, which would eventually lead to a classless society. The whole worldview is based on economics class. When Marx and these guys say, oh, you capitalists are obsessed with capital. No, you guys are obsessed with capital. It's all you guys think about. But the Marxists today would say, okay, we still have the model of oppressor versus oppressed, but it's not based on economics. The race-based Marxist says it's based on race. So it'd be black versus white. So the white person would be the oppressor, the black person would be the oppressed, which is, I think, one of the most offensive. The gender Marxists would say male versus female, those two categories. I think the race-based Marxists are the worst because in America, we are the most unbelievable melting pot. I mean, you look at the Ancestry.com of my kids, they're all over the place. My youngest son's black, he's adopted. And I mean, what am I supposed to bring him up to say, well, listen, I'm white, you're black, I'm your oppressor. all right? Right? You are a victim, and it'd be like telling Oprah Winfrey or Kobe Bryant, right? I know you think you've done really well in America, but you're oppressed because you're black. And that white homeless guy that you pass out there in the street, he's your oppressor. Huh? Well, he's white. So it's incredibly simplistic. And also, I mean, how can you even divide people this way? I had a former student at Grove City College, one of my student assistants, and he's black, but he's not African American. He's actually from India, right? So genetically and in terms of ethnicity, we're all over the place. So to put people in these binary categories of black versus white, oppressor versus oppressor, is insane, and it's very divisive. In fact, that's what it is. It divides people according to groups. MLK said to judge people by the color of their character, the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. Who was it? Lee Wyatt, I'm not saying that right, who knew King said, yeah, he was totally against the idea of dividing people and putting them into groups according to race. David Garrow, who I've emailed with, the King biographer, said, yeah, King would be appalled at the very notion of putting people in categories according to race. But that's what Marxists do. They divide into victim groups, oppressor versus oppressed. And today they've moved from economics and class to race and gender and culture, sexual, other areas. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kengor. That was wonderful. Paul has generously agreed to sign some books right outside here in the hall. We hope that you will all join us for some wine and some food and conversation. Thank you so much for being a part of tonight's event.